Welcome everyone to a new episode of Para Spotlight. Um, with me here today is Ms. Elizabeth Linder from Beautiful Destinations. Hello, Elizabeth. And the topic for today's webinar is traveling at the speed of culture. How do we keep up? So we are partnering, as I said, with Beautiful Destinations, one of our Value PADA members today. Before we jump into the topic, let me say a few house rules, if you want to say so. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar where you can ask all your questions. To do so, please submit your questions in the Q&A box. I know there's also a chat function in this Zoom setup, but please submit your questions in the Q&A box and we will try to answer as many questions as possible once the presentation is done. And then I think that's pretty much it for the most important thing. So yes, So as I said already, Ms. Elizabeth Linder is our speaker for today. She's the Executive Director at Beautiful Destinations, and I'm your host. My name is Rung Tepgeo. I work with the Pacific Asia Travel Association. I am the Manager for Membership Engagement. So if you're a member or you have any questions about the membership, you can also contact me at any time. And I think without further ado, I would give it up to Elizabeth. Welcome.
Rung, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to join you here. I very much appreciate the opportunity to address fellow members of PATA. It's been a real pleasure for Beautiful Destinations to be a member through the years. I have my background in California tech, at Google, YouTube, and Facebook, where I had the pleasure of building out the politics and government division and serving as a spokesperson for 8 years before joining Beautiful Destinations. I joined in 2018. What an extraordinary journey it has been since then. No one could have anticipated that we would be in the midst of a global pandemic here in 2020, but organizations like PATA and so many of you are handling all of this with great aplomb, and it's wonderful and inspiring to see the leadership really come to the fore in the travel and tourism industry as we navigate new territories and new waters. I'm joining you today. Many of you are probably in your afternoon hours. I'm joining you this morning here in London. I had the great pleasure of moving to London about 10 years ago now, and I'm based here in the UK. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and share my screen with the group so that we can move into discussing how it is that we keep up with the extraordinary pace of our culture and our lives today in an interconnected world. Before I dive in, I'll just briefly give an introduction and overview into Beautiful Destinations. Many of you, some of you I know I've had the pleasure of meeting in the past. Some of you might be new to Beautiful Destinations, so this will just provide a brief overview as to who we are and what we do. fair to say that it's not too often in our world today that we can unequivocally believe and agree on something. But Beautiful Destinations, we really do firmly believe that travel is a force for good in our world today. And everything we do, the countries that we work with, the cities that we work with, the regions we work with, all of our clients, join us in really believing that if we can get people out into the world, whether that's just around the corner from where you live or halfway around the world, to see and experience new ideas, new cultures, new ways of life, that brings us together as a global society. So we specialize in marketing specific to the travel and tourism industry. In a very 21st century way. The company actually began as an Instagram account. And back when I was a spokesperson for Facebook and Instagram, I used to talk about some of the hashtag campaigns that Beautiful Destinations was running around the world to get people excited about their destinations. Since those early days, of course, we've grown from being a community to being a full-scale business and marketing agency. And that's what we do today for our clients, bringing their stories and bringing their goals for their economic development through travel and tourism to the fore. We were absolutely thrilled to receive a wonderful award from the UN World Tourism Organization on their Healing Solutions and Healing for Destinations campaign, and also their Africa Branding Challenge, which just tomorrow actually we'll have an opportunity to hear from all of the finalists and share in a celebration for how it is that we can really bring Africa as a continent to life in new and exciting ways during a very challenging time for our industry. We begin everything we do with telling stories. And I think this is one of the areas where I really would like to focus on with today's presentation, and thinking about how it is that we bring the world of global policymaking and the world of the decisions within our governments, within our organizations that seriously impact travel and tourism. How do we actually translate that into compelling stories so that those policies come to life? In my experience, the world of marketing and the world of policymaking are often too far apart from one another. I think it's really, really, really important that we bring those worlds together so that the world of policymaking is borrowing from the creative brain of storytelling, and the world of storytelling is able to successfully channel and funnel those stories into something that makes the world a better place and that achieves the policy goals that are going to help us build for a better and brighter future. All of these stories, of course, is powered by the research access we have through our community and through the proprietary tools that we use to draw from that community of 25 million people around the world to really understand how the world works, to really wrap our head around what sorts of societal changes out there we need to pay attention to in order to succeed and do the best we can to tell those stories and reach people at scale. Now, scale is very important, of course, because networks in the 21st century really operate at their best capacity at scale. And it's through scale and scaled storytelling that we can really achieve broad impact on the destinations that we're looking to support. I wanted to just dial back a couple of months and go into some of this research. When the crisis first hit, and really, March was kind of the time that a number of countries around the world started to go into more serious lockdown phases. We ran a large-scale research study with our users in our community across all of our various platforms. And what we found was a very robust, very ambitious, very optimistic view from people connected to our platforms on social media. Effectively, almost half of them saying that within a few months they were ready to get out there and travel again. Now, of course, that didn't end up mapping to the reality of this pandemic. It's surprising us in a number of ways, this virus. But it's really indicative of the mentality and of the mindset of people. In some fields and in some industries, you might have a a moment hit where you have people essentially just saying, you know what, no problem, I can just give that up. I can just do something else. But in travel and tourism, something significantly happens and people say, look, I'll take a pause for now, but I'm ready to get back in the game as soon as I possibly can. And that's a very, very good sign for our industry. What we also noticed is that people were less concerned about getting sick and more concerned about getting stuck. What people were most worried about is the possibility that they would potentially actually, get stuck in a destination, not be able to get home. That, of course, impacts the economics of your job. It impacts where you stay, where you live, your family. And it was those kinds of worries and those kinds of concerns that had less, in fact, to do with public health in a way, and more to do with the logistics of traveling. So there's a few key conclusions we can draw from this research at scale. And the first is, as marketers in the travel and tourism industry, we are often really, really, really good at the inspiration piece. And that's important, and I'm going to come back to that later. Inspiration comes naturally to marketers. What doesn't always come naturally to marketers are practicalities. Something that we noticed in the early days of Facebook, as governments were starting to adopt Facebook and Instagram into their communications strategies, is we would constantly remind them, you don't always have to be the most interesting Facebook page in the world, as long as you're useful. Are you getting people the information they need? Are you getting practical information they need in order to lead their lives or fill out complicated government forms or know where to vote? And there's something similar going on right now in the travel and tourism industry. Yes, we want to inspire people about our destinations. Yes, we want to tell amazing stories. But right now, people also need to have the comfort of understanding what is exactly the procedure at the airport that they need to prepare for. How do they fill out a specialized form? How do they go about ensuring that they've been tested properly to meet your requirements? Those are not particularly exciting stories to tell, but they're necessary stories to tell. And in today's world, it's extremely important when we're thinking about destination marketing that we're building those practicalities into our messaging strategy so that people actually feel comfortable. Reliability is also very, very important. And I think this is especially important for emerging markets and emerging destinations to lean into. People are so much more likely as they start traveling again to go to the familiar. This is not really a time where people are taking risks. Whereas pre-COVID, we saw a massive increase in people wanting to try something new. So if you're an emerging market or destination, if you're a place that someone has never been to before, you're going to want to figure out a communications and marketing strategy to ensure that people feel somehow comfortable with your place. How can you ensure that there's some level of baseline understanding that people have so that rather than play up the opportunity to take a risk and go somewhere exotic that they've never been, you're showcasing to them that so many elements of your destination are well connected, are well serviced, have all of the comforts of a destination they might be more familiar with, but provides them an eye on a new perspective that perhaps they haven't seen before. And then, of course, finally, we also need to really think thoughtfully about the interplay between state actors and non-state actors, the individual citizen and our governments and our government leaders as we go through this period. We're going to talk in a little bit about the impacts that a leader has on the soft power pull of their destination. But when it comes to some of the practicalities of how it is that life is playing out in a certain place, people are going to feel much more at ease understanding what the day-to-day experience is of the locals and the local citizens than they are at the government level. We all know that in most national parliaments, for example, politicians will be going in for socially distant meetings, and you'll see all of the official pictures, and that's all very well and good, but it doesn't give any indication as to how real life is playing out in that country. And in order to attract and engage and inspire people to come to your destination, you really need to give them a window or an insight into what it's like in the day-to-day, especially if the day-to-day is getting quite back to normal. The comfort in seeing the restaurants, the neighborhoods, the streets buzzing, getting back to normal again is something you'll want to showcase as you think about your post-COVID marketing strategy. Now, I chose, in the context of the time we have together today, three cultural shifts, movements that are moving very, very quickly, that are constantly dynamic and changing, that I wanted to focus on with you today. The first and really exciting, I think, shift that we've seen in our COVID environment is the future of work. The future of work used to be very much connected to technology. How was the tech sector changing the future of the workplace? Artificial intelligence, automation, robotics. There was even almost a bit of fear around the future of work. I would say the future of work was connected to the rise of populism and discontent, in that it was, driving people out of a job because the robot was coming in to take your job. And there was this sort of scaremongering about the future of work. COVID has changed all of that. This entire period in 2020 has transitioned the future of work from being a question just about technology, which was a bit alarming, scary, uneasy, into a question about geography, which is exciting, because all of a sudden we're looking around our world today and we're thinking, wow, you actually, as long as you have an internet connection, can hypothetically work from anywhere. Now that opens up a whole realm of possibilities, but there's very real implications that destinations need to take into consideration, that marketers need to take into consideration in order to anticipate this exciting trend, which in my opinion is going to define in large part the decades conversation that we have ahead of us leading up into 2030. Some of those implications, for example, are visas. Again, back to the practicalities. If you want to come to our destination and work from here for 3 months, for 6 months, here's the things you need to do if you're part of a corporate environment. Here's the things you do need to do if you're an entrepreneur. In fact, I would even argue that the travel and tourism industry can lean in even more to the visa conversation around the world. Some countries are already doing this, but it's so important to anticipate, how do you actually make it possible for a globally connected citizenry to embrace the future of work and attract them to your destination. Same goes for the practicalities of the work environment, the kinds of shared office spaces with short-term contracts that people might have access to, the Wi-Fi they might have access to. How do you actually curate and create a destination where, as people are thinking about where it makes sense to work, they might consider you? Even time zones are important to consider. A lot of people, when you're thinking about the world, you're thinking about going around it. But if you're going up and down it, of course, you can go quite a far distance with very little impact on time zones. That's exciting. That means that you can do the job and keep the hours that you typically do wherever it is you live now from an entirely destination, but that's a few lines of latitude away from you. So there's a lot going on in this space. And what's even more exciting is research shows that for individuals that do have jobs that can translate into the home working environment, into the remote working environment, those individuals are as productive, if not even more productive than they were in the past in their office cultures. We all know this, that people work more when you work from home. That's one of the knock-on effects. I think we all find that, closing your laptop screen is probably a little later when you're working from home than it would be when you're in the office hours. studies do show that people work an additional 1.4 days per month when they work from home than when they're in the office. But the advantage is studies also show less stress coming from senior management, for example. And also people show that CEOs polled that productivity goes up by as much as 16% when individuals work from home. Now, of course, this is a complicated space. A lot of jobs don't translate easily to home. A lot of people don't have ideal working environments from home, or have kids and dogs and pets running around. But in the macro level, there's a huge professional audience to capture who is healthier, happier, more productive, working outside of the office than in the office. And we need to ensure as an industry that we're on top of these trends and that we're doing what we need to do, not only to capture this audience and get them excited about our destinations from a practical standpoint, but also, of course, from an inspirational standpoint. I would say that probably in the last number of decades, human professional societies have vastly underestimated the role of inspiration, the role of nature, the role of beauty in our happiness, especially in our work environment. When we think about most office cultures, we don't necessarily think of what could be truly inspiring. An office plant doesn't replace the kind of imagery you see in this image here from Vermont as the fall leaves change. And so I think what we're going to see in the next few years is a number of measurements that help us wrap our head better around what it means to be in an inspiring place in terms of the sheer geography, the sheer beauty of the place as it impacts who we are as individuals and who we are as professionals. And I would really, really encourage us to pay deep attention to those trends, because they will be important and they will impact our industry in hopefully what will be a positive way, and help to make up for the detrimental impacts of 2020 this particular year. Now, the second trend to really pay close attention to is, especially when it comes to marketing, storytelling, reaching new audiences, is the ways in which social change movements begin in one corner of the globe and immediately start to translate around the world. And there are some very real examples of that. Now, from my background at Facebook, within weeks of joining Facebook, we were observing the first organized protest against FARC in Latin America, organized on Facebook and spreading around the world like a shot. And we were all, so surprised. At that time, of course, it was a very positive level of surprise that a march for the better was taking off so quickly and so rapidly around the world. In today's world, it's of course more of a mixed bag. Some of this is positive societal change, some of it is worrisome. But we have to pay attention to these movements, because these movements do impact the way that people can be reached from a marketing perspective. One of those, of course, is the Black Lives Matter movement. This is a movement, of course, that began in the United States, but for a number of us around the world, we are noticing that you can be halfway around the world and your corner of the world is also impacted by a movement that's taking place in the United States. I certainly remember one of the days of one of the major marches, here in London, listening to the helicopters overhead as they were reporting on this huge march, going over to the US Embassy, and thinking, wow, only a few decades ago, these kinds of movements were not nearly as global as they are today. But they're not only global, they're also very fast moving. And again, in a lot of cases, that is exciting and that is inspiring, because it brings the world together for positive societal change. So when Beautiful Destinations was looking, for example, at the UNWTO's Brand Africa campaign, we used as inspiration the positive impact that the Black Lives Matter movement has had on encouraging more voices to come from the origin continent of Africa itself. And I'll just briefly pause to share this with you. Ooh.
Africa. The first thing that comes to mind is wild animals, vast landscapes, safaris, ancient tribes, and the cradle of humanity. But there is a huge disconnect with the real Africa. Africa is made up of many countries, cultures, and stories that have remained untold by Western popular culture. Many countries in Africa have positioned themselves to take bold measures on climate change, sustainability, as well as the evolution and promotion of its art scene. Africa is at the forefront of a boom in entrepreneurship, innovation, and a revolution in its economic power. These stories of success need to be consciously captured, told, and shared to foster a modern and refreshed view of Africa in the eyes of the rest of the world. This is Africa, a new way forward, is not just a slogan. It is a declaration. It is time that the rest of the world stops writing Africa's narrative and starts listening to the narrative Africans are writing for ourselves. Why do you travel to Africa? To see this story, the African story, as expressed the African way. This is Africa, a new way forward, is a proud declaration from us, the people of Africa. From now on, we are the ones setting the narrative. We welcome you here to see Africa through our eyes.
So in that brief, in that brief piece of content, what you see is the inspiration that's coming from a global movement. We know, of course, around the world that so many millions of people are engaged in that movement, and we're using that as inspiration for place, for geography, for location, storytelling. So really paying attention to those movements, to the way in which those movements shape the zeitgeist, the mentality of your 21st century audiences is so important to pay attention to. And finally, I would just cite geopolitical shifts often are, I think, a real missed opportunity when it comes to place, destination, and branding. And we just have to come together to get so much better at that. This stems from, of course, a lot of thinking around soft power. Interestingly, as we look at the measurement of soft power, the US took a dip in its soft power in 2016, but that dip in 2016 is dwarfed by what's going on now. The response in the United States to COVID has actually had a very marked detrimental impact on the soft power pull of the United States. But of course, elections are coming very soon. Elections in November will entirely change the game. And leaning into what kinds of stories that tells about the future of the United States and how it is that you could think about integrating those stories into a campaign is going to change entirely, depending on what happens in November and what kinds of stories those elections yield. And elections, of course, take place at the national, but also at the local level. Many of us are paying attention to the new agreements, trade agreements, business agreements, travel agreements between the Gulf states and Israel. I was recently in conversations with some business leaders in the region who just said, Elizabeth, it's just buzzing. I spend half my day now on the phone to Dubai or to Tel Aviv. This is all happening at once, extraordinarily exciting. So taking our cues from what's going on at a trade negotiation or at a business standpoint and using that as inspiration to tell stories from the region, stories that have to do with travel and global movements is powerful and is important. The impact of national leaders as well today, especially during this virus period, you know, people are tuning in more than they typically would for daily or weekly briefings on what's going on in their countries at a national level. You're really at the mercy of your national political leaders to understand whether or not you can go to a restaurant, whether or not you need to stay home, how many people you can socialize with, and the list goes on. One example that's had a huge bump in soft power comes out of New Zealand. Jacinda Ardern, of course, is going through an election cycle at the moment, but prior to that election cycle kicking in, was on social media every single day, keeping people updated about the decisions she was making in a very real, very authentic voice. Interestingly, her audience, therefore, on social media is not only an audience that is domestic and will actually be voting this week, but that audience is also fiercely international. Those are the kinds of people that are following her social media channels, getting inspired by an individual as a leader, and we need to figure out how to capture that exact target audience to encourage them, for example, to book a trip to that destination because they're inspired by that destination's leadership. And of course, here in the UK, Brexit now seems rather quaint compared to what the world is going through now. Brexit was, of course, the biggest topic in this country prior to the virus hitting. But long term, it does seriously have an impact on the way that people see their access to London, to Europe. As the trade negotiations progress, and as countries think about new ways to frame those negotiations and to frame those ties, and you know, especially as we think about doing business in fresh and new markets with new bilateral negotiations, that all starts to weave its way into the national dialogue. People are, you know, reading about these topics every single day when they're hearing about what business opportunities will arise from trade negotiations. And that already starts to plant in the imagination and in the mind new opportunities. Those opportunities stem from politics, they stem from business, but ultimately, if we're careful enough to watch them and anticipate them, we can actually take those you know, in-house into our marketing world and use them to tell stories and inspire people to take action in terms of their personal and professional lives for where they're traveling around the world. So I just wanted to end on that note and just share with you a final piece of content from us. I can't help myself, of course, working for beautiful destinations, we live and breathe content and every single day. So this particular video was done as an official partnership with the European Union a couple years ago during their last election cycle. The European Union had chosen travel, our industry, as a key pillar of their election messaging campaign to effectively remind European citizens that travel throughout the continent is not a God-given right here. It's a right that is implemented by policymakers, by the leaders they elect into Brussels to make those decisions and keep those borders open. And so this video helped to reinforce that message with young people, and I'll share it here.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Today, major European cities report a mass influx of British tourists as panic starts to spread across the United Kingdom. Her Majesty's Passport Office is forced to shut down due to increased passport demands.
This time I'm voting.
Polls indicate record number of youth voting. Voting up 1,000% amongst young voters. Stand up for what you believe.
So in that example, you can see the way in which the world of travel, tourism, place, geography, and the world of geopolitics play into each other to create stories and content that inspire people not only to travel, but also to go out and to vote. That election did actually yield a very high turnout of young people. And many of you will have recognized a number of the iconic destinations featured in that video. Our team was able to cover in the span of just a month nearly all of the countries within the European Union to put that piece of content together for the European Parliament in Brussels, which is of course where the final scene of the video takes place. So there's so much more we can say. There's so much to think about this year. Wow, what a year. But I've just highlighted here three key themes that have really been top of mind for us at Beautiful Destinations, which is the future of work and all of the opportunities that provides, both from a policy level and also from a content storytelling, marketing, inspirational level. Global movements and the ways in which those global movements get into the zeitgeist of the people, inspire people, and how we connect those movements into the travel and tourism industry and the sense of place and geography that we're constantly aiming to promote. And then of course, finally, shifts in the macro at the geopolitical level that impacts the soft and hard power pull of a destination and give us new opportunities to tell stories that really fit into what it is that so many travelers are paying attention to in the broader context of the world today. So again, thank you so very much for having me. It's a pleasure to spend a little bit of time with you today. And I believe, Rung, that we have some time now for some questions.
Yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. It was a very insightful and interesting presentation. So thank you for that. Yes, please feel free to submit questions. So we give people a bit of time to submit their questions. And then I loved the last video, especially. That was by Beautiful Destinations, right? That was, yeah.
Yes, all of the content featured was our own content. We're right now the fastest growing travel community on TikTok. So even though we're so well known for Instagram, we are growing very, very quickly in those emerging platforms as well. As you could see in that particular example, something that our team just loves doing is experimenting with the latest technology that they bring into content creation. So this is the sort of work that is so fun to see, with our content creators when they're buzzing, how it is that they're bringing in all of these new tricks of the camera and bringing in new tricks from drone footage to create something that's really special and compelling and exciting.
Yeah, it's very unique. I mean, like you see so many great videos, but this one was like as you said, like the way they did the video with like the perspective, like the fish angle camera. I think that's what, oh, fish eye camera. And like, yeah, it was great. I'm not sure if we have like questions so far. No one has submitted any, but I will just go ahead and ask you a few questions if you don't mind. So generally, I would be interested. Do you have? I mean, it can be one of the destinations you're working with, or generally like one of the destinations that you can just think of. Do you have an example, or yeah, just an example of a destination where you think, oh, they're doing a really great job of like how they're communicating at the moment and like what they're doing in these difficult times?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I'll start pre-COVID, and then we'll move into these times. We did a piece of work for Minister Rania, Dr. Rania in Egypt when she was the Minister of Tourism in Egypt. And you know, her vision when she came in as a leader, as a minister, was very, very strong, which is to say, you know, what we need to do is ensure that people are actually seeing Egypt through the lens of Egyptians and of the Egyptian people. Because I think, you know, we talked about geopolitics and paying attention to geopolitics in the macro. That can be both to lean in to positive soft power, as in our example from New Zealand. It also can be something that you actually need to reroute. So much of North Africa, so much of the Middle East still is not back up to pre-Arab Spring numbers in terms of travel and tourism. And so how are you paying attention to those macro geopolitical trends in order to figure out a new compelling story to share? And in the case of Egypt, what really emerged was that, you know, uncovering stories of, you know, real people and putting the faces of people to the front of a marketing campaign is something that ended up being enormously successful during Minister Rania's time. I think that's important just generally. So many marketing campaigns in the travel and tourism industry are really, really good at featuring place, but sometimes not as good at featuring people. And at the end of the day, there's so many, you know, beaches around the world, for example, but there's only one you. There's only one room, and there's only one of your stories to tell. And so there's something really compelling and really exciting for an audience to be able to hear those human interest stories that get beyond the beauty and the scenery.
Okay, thank you. So by now we have a couple of questions. Let me start with this one. What is your favorite of all video stories by beautiful destinations, and why?
Oh goodness. Well, it sounds as though the person who asked that question potentially has seen some of our content, so that's great, and thank you so much for that. One of my favorites that I find myself watching over and over again, if you visited us on YouTube, is a video called Let's Go Paris. The cinematography in that one, I think, is so beautiful. I could watch that over and over again. Obviously, living here in London, I've been to Paris countless numbers of time, and so you'd think that, you know, featuring a destination like Paris, I've seen it all, so to speak. But I think the way it's choreographed is really quite special. As many of you know, we're really careful with the individual content creators that we work with around the world. So you have to meet a real standard of excellence to be creating content for beautiful destinations. But what's really exciting is we're fiercely passionate about not only bringing our own team into the work that we do, but in partnering and collaborating with local content creators from countries with whom we work. And that's one of the most exciting pieces of the project. I mentioned Egypt. Just this last Saturday, I got a call from one of the content creators, Egyptian content creators, you know, who's not full-time beautiful destinations, but worked with us on that campaign. And it's always so fun to keep up with the men and women that are in our network creating content out there in the field.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I like the fact that you are engaging like local people as well when you do these kind of content pieces.
Yeah, it's important as well. They know their destination better than anybody, you know.
Yeah.
You know your own neighborhood, your own neck of the woods better than any international company. And so it's really important, I think, to marry the two. And especially, you know, to think about how we use storytelling at a world-class scale to amplify those beautiful, that beautiful content and those individual voices. Because so many people have something to say, but how do you say it? How do you get that message out there? And that's where that that bringing together of the local and the international is so effective and so powerful.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, let's go ahead. We have some more questions. Here is one. Is content management strategy driven by geopolitics or just by own storytelling? I'm not sure. Yeah, that.
Wow, I think so. I think it's both. And that's, I think, what's really, really important to do. What I always encourage is paying very, very, very strong attention to measurements of soft power. And there's a lot of ways to do that. We have a few tools we use ourselves, but to understand how it is that you're perceived by the rest of the world. I've been an expatriate for the last 10 years, and so I have a very high level of awareness as to how Americans and America comes across on the international and global stage. And there are times that I'm very proud of that, and there are times that I, you know, would love to rewrite some narratives in ourselves, but you have to understand that. And I think what we sometimes tend to do is we are sometimes not realizing how some of our biggest instruments of soft power can be channeled to tell a story about our place that comes from geopolitics. We're also sometimes a little bit shy to talk about them because as marketers in the travel tourism space, we sometimes want to distance ourselves from politics. But geopolitics matter because it's often those shifts that make global headlines, and that therefore impacts the baseline understanding that somebody has on your place. And so I think from an introductory perspective, what shifts in geopolitics actually create a narrative that already exists in the world about your destination? You have to understand that. You have to be honest about that. And then from there, you can figure out how to curate and shape your marketing campaign. But popping something out there just completely independent of an understanding as to where you currently sit is something that I would aim to avoid if possible, because you're going to have a more effective campaign if you understand those levers of soft power that you can use to your advantage.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few more questions. I don't think we have time for all of them, but let's do another 2 or 3 maybe. Sure. So one is from one of our participants. Are photos enhanced? If yes, to what extent? To what percentage do you think destination photos should be enhanced to gather commercial attention?
Oh, wow. So that's a great question. That is definitely, it's a really, really great question. But that's definitely a question for my colleagues who are on the content creation side. I run our government relations team, and it's a real pleasure to be within the industry. But a question around specifics on that, I think definitely I would need to ask my colleagues on the content side. I'm more than happy, though, anyone who would like to get in touch with me directly to have a conversation about some of these issues with a member of our team, please just feel free to get in touch, and I'll point you in the right direction.
Yes, so since we already mentioned it, please feel free to email us or Elizabeth directly. She has shared her email. Do you want to mention it again at this point? So
yeah, I'm happy to. Yeah, it's Elizabeth. I spell that with a Z. Elizabeth at beautifuldestinations.com. So feel free to get in touch, or feel free to get in touch. We're members, of course, of PATA, so Rung knows where to find us.
Yeah, yes, please do so. Okay, so I'll do 2 more. So how far is the reaction of most destinations you're working with? Have they been very active, or are they still having like a more conservative position toward the current situation?
Yeah, so I think that's changed in the last couple of months. I think initially our clients were really focused on very quickly saying, what is our post-virus, strategy? That was the first wave. And then I think as the uncertainty continued and still does continue, we've moved into a more productive phase, which is actually, what are the stories we can be telling now, independent of what's going to happen in 6 months' time, because we frankly don't know what's going to happen in 6 months' time. But in the meantime, it would be a missed opportunity to focus so much on a known unknown versus to focus on something we know now. And that's what's happening in the here and the now. So putting myself in the shoes of a marketer from a destination out there, I would definitely encourage you to just take a step back from what's going to happen down the road and tell amazing stories about what's happening now. What are stories about your destination that you've always wanted to share that you've never had time to share because you're so focused on a new airline route or this or that? Just embrace that in the next couple of months, because as we move into 2021, that opportunity to take that moment is going to evaporate, because we will then be so busy with kind of a new world order that we will understand. But the uncertainty is such that I think you just confuse your audience by doing the kind of start, stop, start, stop. And a number of governments have experienced that in their own communications and have regretted that. So that would be my advice.
Okay, thank you. Okay, one last question. What are your criteria to choose a destination to work with? Do you have criteria, and what are they?
Oh, wow. Well, there's so much that goes into that. I think, one of them is we really, really, really believe not only is travel a force of good for the traveler, because you learn new perspectives, and that's really exciting. But travel is also a force for good for the economic development of the local population. And what's really important to us when we're going out there in the world and talking to destinations and meeting with leaders of their destinations is we want to see that they're in this industry for the right reasons. Are you in this industry to make the world a better place? Are you in this industry to create a more sustainable future for the next generation? Are you in this industry to honor the sense of place that you curate? But also, are you in this industry because your own communities can benefit so much from the travel and tourism and hospitality industry? It brings out the arts, it brings out a service culture that encourages pride in field, pride in country, pride in industry in a positive way. So what we always try to do is find those leaders and seek them out and work with them, because we believe that will have a positive impact not only on the experience of the traveler, but also on the local economic development of the destination we're working with.
Okay, thank you. Oh, well, that's beautiful, like beautiful destinations, right? So yeah, I think we're at the end of our time here. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It was really, really great, and it was really insightful. And yeah, I hope to meet you one day in person, because it was great having this conversation with you. I hope the audience enjoyed this as well. I'm sorry there were a few questions we didn't get to answer, but as we said, please feel free to reach out to us. My colleague has put the email addresses in the chat, so just send us an email and we will get back to you. We got a few questions regarding the recording. The recording will be available on YouTube later, and we'll also send a link out to everyone who has registered as well. So that's going to be out there, and you can rewatch it anytime and share it with anyone you think this might be useful for. So yes, Elizabeth, thank you so much. I wish you a really great day, because it's the start of your day. For anyone who's in our time zone, have a good afternoon or evening. And yes, please come back next time for the next PADA Spotlight, which is going to be November 11th. More details to be announced soon. Okay.
Thank you, Rune. Thank you all.
Thank you,
good evening.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.